Adam, you have a really interesting story about your role in Harvard's first online social network. I actually had no idea about this till I read your book. Can you tell us a bit about this story? It's so interesting.
Okay, so let's go back to 1999. A group of high school seniors get into Harvard. They want to go, but they're afraid they're not going to have any friends there. So they go to the state of the art technology at the time, which is America Online. They start searching profiles to find future classmates. And they find a few and they start a little email list. And then every week they add more people to the list. And by the time they arrive on campus, they've connected more than an eighth of the entering Harvard freshman class. And then they shut down their social network, saying, we all live in the same town. We don't need an online social network anymore. And Mark Zuckerberg starts Facebook in the house next door 5 years later. So the students who co-founded that original social network have lived with deep regret ever since. And I know this because I was one of them. I was one of the co-founders, and it never even occurred to me to rethink a bunch of those assumptions. I did not realize that social media would be useful, even if you could interact with people face to face. I had no idea this was more than a passing hobby, that it might be a business. I saw myself as a student. It didn't occur to me to question that identity and say, I could be an entrepreneur. And obviously it was such a missed opportunity to think again. And let's be clear, I don't know how to code. I never would have had the vision for what Facebook
Yes.
became. But I think a lot of us have been in that position where we had an idea or we made a decision. We didn't realize we were making assumptions. And in hindsight, we probably should have identified them and rethought them.
You have a on that topic, you have a really interesting story about the guy, about Mike, who was the owner of BlackBerry, about how he was very steadfast and really didn't rethink he didn't rethink to move BlackBerry onto something even more than what it was.
Mike Lazaridis, such a prime example of a dynamic that really surprised me when I was researching Think Again. I assumed that the smarter you were, the better you'd be at rethinking. And the data showed the exact opposite, that the more intelligent you were, the more likely you were to find reasons to stick with your existing beliefs. And you could always convince yourself that you had been right in the past and you were sort of contorting your intelligence into a weapon against the truth. And I thought Mike Lazaridis was a really interesting example of this because he probably more than anybody else in our time ignited the smartphone revolution.
Yeah.
Right at the early days, the BlackBerry was actually just a two-way pager, and it dawned on him as an electrical engineer that you could reimagine it and create a two-way communication device that would allow us to send emails on the go. And the BlackBerry exploded. Right, I think everyone you knew probably had one at one
Oh,
point,
absolutely.
and it just dominated the market. And although he was able to rethink other people's assumptions, he did not want to let go of his own.
Mm.
He resisted the idea of a touchscreen. He said, the keyboard is the thing that everybody wants. He thought of the device as only useful for work emails, forgetting that there might be millions of people using it that way, but there were potentially billions of people who would use it for home entertainment. And even when the iPhone came out, he pried it open. He's an engineer. This is what he does. He opens it up, and he says they put a computer inside of this thing. And even at that point, he still doesn't want to rethink the BlackBerry. I think at their peak, they were valued at over $70 billion, and they still only had one product. It was just different versions of a BlackBerry. Like, wouldn't you take those resources and maybe experiment with a few other possibilities too? And he fell in love with his baby. And for me, it was a tragedy because I still miss the keyboard. I was with him on that. I thought it was better than the touchscreen.
Yeah.
I hate typing on the stupid iPhone, but I was wrong.
Whatever happened to Mike Lazaridis?
Well, this is probably the epilogue that I should have written in the book, but it turns out that when RIM essentially goes bust as a company, you have all of these great tech engineers and programmers and designers who then are looking for jobs, and they're all living in Waterloo, Canada. And dozens and dozens of them have started companies, and they've basically built this extraordinary tech ecosystem in this kind of middle of nowhere town in Canada. So you could consider him now the patron saint of Canadian hotbeds of entrepreneurship. But I'm still mad that the BlackBerry is not functional.
Well, yeah, I know. Such a shame and such an amazing story to prove your point about thinking again. Adam, you say if we are preaching, we don't see gaps in our knowledge. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the mental models that stop us from thinking again.
Yeah,
So
great.
my colleague Phil Tetlock did this. He wrote a brilliant paper about how we spend too much time when we make decisions, when we explain ourselves to other people, thinking like preachers, prosecutors, and politicians. When you're in preacher mode, you're trying to defend your views. When
Mm,
you're in prosecutor mode, you're attacking somebody else's views. And when you're in politician mode, you only listen to people who share your views. And it's easy to see why those mindsets stop you from thinking again, because you've already decided that you're right and they're wrong. So they need to rethink, but you're good. You've already discovered the truth. And I think the preaching impulse comes in part from wanting to not only validate our own beliefs, but also then to to get that sense of reinforcement. Like if I could persuade more people that I've seen the light, then my truth will be more widely shared, and that means I live in a world where I'm definitely right.